Close your eyes for a moment. Somewhere in the distance, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The low, mournful whistle of a train drifting through the dark. It is one of the oldest sounds in American memory. Tonight, we are going to follow that sound. We are going to travel the length of a continent, through mountain passes and golden prairies, through summer heat and winter snow, through a century of iron and steam and human ambition. And by the time our journey ends, you will be somewhere very quiet and very still, ready to rest. So settle in, let your shoulders drop, take one slow breath, and let the story begin. It is the summer of 1827, and the city of Baltimore smells of salt and horses and fresh-cut timber. Down near the waterfront, merchants in tall hats are gathering. They are worried men, worried in the particular way that ambitious men always are, which is to say, they see possibility everywhere and fear arriving too late to claim it. The problem is this. To the west, over the long spine of the Appalachian Mountains, lies an enormous country. Rivers and forests and dark, rich soil stretching farther than anyone has ever properly mapped. But getting goods over those mountains costs a fortune and takes forever. Wagons break their axles on mountain roads. Horses exhaust themselves on the grades. By the time anything travels from the Ohio River Valley to the Atlantic coast, half the profit has been swallowed by the journey itself. Someone, in this summer of 1827, has an idea. Iron rails, a locomotive powered by steam, a Baltimore and Ohio railroad. The words sound almost magical when they are first spoken aloud. A railroad, a road made of iron stretching west over the mountains toward the heart of a continent. The ceremony they hold, the laying of the first stone, draws thousands of people. 90-year-old Charles Carroll of Carrollton, one of the last surviving signers of the Declaration of Independence, presses a silver spade into the Maryland earth. He is said to have remarked that this act is among the most important of his long life. The crowd cheers. Somewhere nearby a band is playing. Children sit on fence posts to see. And with that, the American railroad age begins. In these early years, almost everything about the railroad is an experiment. Nobody quite agrees on how wide the tracks should be. Nobody is entirely sure how much weight the locomotives can pull, or how fast they can go, or whether passengers will find the experience pleasant or terrifying, or both. On some of the very first stretches of track, the cars are still pulled by horses, the iron rails are there, but the steam engine hasn't quite arrived yet to run on them. But soon enough, it does arrive. Imagine standing beside the track somewhere in Maryland on an autumn morning. The air has that particular crispness that belongs only to October, cool and clean and smelling faintly of wood smoke. The fields on either side are going gold and amber, and then you hear it. First just a distant rumbling, then a tremendous hissing. Then the locomotive comes around the curve, black iron and white steam, enormous and terrifying and beautiful all at once, and it passes you in a rush of hot air and noise and is gone, leaving only the fading smell of coal smoke drifting over the stubble fields. Nothing in the world has ever moved like that before. In the decades that follow, Americans take to the railroad the way they have taken to almost every new thing in their history, with the greedy, joyful, sometimes reckless enthusiasm that is their particular national gift. Companies spring up everywhere. State legislatures authorize new lines with the casual generosity of people who cannot quite believe what they are building. In Massachusetts, granite from the quarries near Quincy begins riding rails to the coast. In South Carolina, a line reaches out from Charleston toward the Savannah River. In Pennsylvania, the main line of public works begins the long climb over the mountains. Everywhere, the sound of hammers. Everywhere, the smell of fresh-turned earth. The country is threading itself together with iron. By the time the 1850s arrive, something remarkable has happened. The railroads of the Northeast have grown into a web, not always neat, not always logical, but dense and connected and alive. You can step onto a train in Boston and, With enough patience and a few changes of cars, find yourself in Chicago. Cities that were once separated by weeks of difficult travel are now only days apart, then hours. The effect on ordinary life is difficult to exaggerate. A farmer in Ohio who once could only sell his grain to his nearest neighbors can now send it east to the cities or south to the rivers. The price of food in Boston begins to reflect the harvest in Indiana. The whole country starts to breathe together like a single living thing because of these iron threads connecting it. In the Midwest, in what people are beginning to call the Corn Belt, more than 80% of farms come to sit within 5 miles of a railroad line. 5 miles. On a clear morning, a farmer standing in his field can hear the distant whistle. He knows that his grain, his hogs, his cattle are not stranded with him in the middle of the continent. They have a road, an iron road that leads everywhere. The great American desert, that vast, intimidating emptiness of the Louisiana Purchase, begins slowly and then with startling speed to become a breadbasket. Not over centuries, as it might have taken with wagon roads alone, over decades. The railroad is not just moving goods, it is moving time itself. Then comes the war. The Civil War arrives in 1861, and it brings with it a brutal lesson about what the railroads have really built. In the north, every major city is already connected. Troops and supplies can move with a speed and precision that earlier generals could not have imagined. A regiment in Maine can be in Virginia within days. Ammunition, food, medicine, all of it flowing through the iron network like blood through veins. In the South, it is different. The Confederate railroads exist, but they do not truly connect. Different lines use different gauges, the width between the rails, so that a car on one line simply cannot roll onto another. Supplies pile up at junction points with no way to move them forward. The South fights with courage and brilliance, but it is fighting, in part, against a logistical problem it cannot solve. The war ends. The country, exhausted and grieving, turns its face westward. The great project of the Transcontinental Railroad begins in earnest. Imagine 2 armies of workers, one pushing east from California, one pushing west from Nebraska, closing the distance between them across 2,000 miles of prairie and desert and mountain. On the western end, Chinese laborers work in the Sierra Nevada with a patience and precision that is almost incomprehensible. They lower themselves down sheer cliff faces in wicker baskets to drill holes for the blasting powder. They work through winters of snow so deep that entire work camps are buried. They move mountains. Literally, they move mountains. On the eastern end, Irish immigrants fresh from the hardships of the post-famine years drive the Union Pacific across the Great Plains. The pace is extraordinary. Some days, several miles of track laid between sunrise and sunset. The foreman calls out a rhythm, and the workers move like a single organism, rail after rail after rail, dropping into place. Out on the flat Nebraska prairie at night, the work camps are small cities of fire and noise. Men eat and play cards and sing in a dozen languages. Somewhere nearby, the dark grass goes on forever, and above it, the stars. On May 10, 1869, at a place called Promontory Summit in Utah Territory, the 2 lines meet. A golden spike is driven. The telegraph carries the news instantly to both coasts. In San Francisco and New York and Chicago, church bells ring. People pour into the streets. They know, with a certainty that is almost physical, that the country has been changed forever. The continent is crossed. The decades that follow are a kind of golden age, though golden ages are rarely peaceful from the inside. The railroad companies grow enormously powerful. Men like Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould and J.P. Morgan accumulate fortunes that are almost beyond comprehension, building and buying and reorganizing rail lines the way other men play chess. Morgan is a particular figure of this age, enormous in presence, imperious, brilliant. He sits in his New York offices surrounded by the smoke of his cigars and moves railroads around like pieces on a board. He raises money in London, where an entire section of the stock exchange is devoted to American rails. He reorganizes failing lines, forces competing companies into cooperation, builds what he believes is a rational system out of the chaos of American ambition. Sometimes he succeeds. Sometimes the chaos wins anyway. The panic of 1873 sweeps through the railroad industry like a cold wind, bankrupting companies that had overbuilt and borrowed too freely. The panic of 1893 is worse. 1/4 of all American railroads fail. The Great Northern Pacific, the Union Pacific, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, all of them go into receivership, but they come back. They are reorganized, consolidated, made leaner. By 1916, the American railroad network reaches its greatest extent, 254,000 miles of track. If you laid it all out in a single line, it would circle the earth more than 10 times. 254,000 miles of iron. There is a particular quality to the golden years of American rail travel, roughly from the turn of the century through the 1930s, that lives in memory as something warm and melancholy and deeply beautiful. Think of a great passenger train in, say, 1925. The locomotive is enormous, polished, breathing steam in the cold station air. The conductors stand on the platform in their uniforms, checking their watches with the particular gravity of men who understand that time is their medium, the thing they work in. Inside the cars, the seats are upholstered in green or burgundy velvet. The dining car smells of coffee and warm bread. At night, the Pullman porter makes up your bed, pulling down the berth, tucking white sheets, drawing the curtains, and you lie there in the dark while America rolls past the window. The sound is extraordinary, that deep rhythmic percussion of wheels on rail joints. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. It is one of the most soporific sounds in the world. Generations of Americans fell asleep to it, businessmen and immigrants and children and soldiers, all of them rocking gently in their berths while the prairie moved past in the dark, or the mountains, or the sleeping small towns with their lit station platforms and their quiet streets. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. The train carries you, and you don't have to do anything at all except lie there and let the miles pass beneath you. The Great Age cannot last forever. Nothing does. After the Second World War, the American love affair shifts. The automobile becomes the symbol of freedom and modernity. New highways spread across the country, smooth, wide, paid for by the government. Trucks begin carrying freight that once moved by rail. Airplanes begin carrying passengers who once slept in Pullman berths. The railroad companies struggle. Their rates are still controlled by the government, making it hard to compete. Their infrastructure is aging. The grand passenger trains, those rolling hotels, begin to lose money faster than the freight can make it back. One by one, the great railroads begin to fail. The Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central, two of the oldest and proudest names in American transportation, merge in 1968 in a desperate attempt to survive. 2 years later, the Penn Central declares bankruptcy, the largest bankruptcy in American history up to that point. Other lines follow. Congress steps in. A government corporation called Amtrak takes over most long-distance passenger service in 1971. Another, called Conrail, handles freight in the bankrupt Northeast. The golden era of private railroading is, in most meaningful senses, over. And yet, the freight railroad did not die. It transformed. Strip away the romance of the passenger era, the velvet seats, the dining cars, the sleeping berths, and what remains is something useful and enduring. Bulk freight, coal from Wyoming mountains, grain from Kansas fields, containers stacked high on double-deck flat cars, moving from the ports of Los Angeles and Seattle to the warehouses of the interior. The modern freight locomotive bears almost no resemblance to its ancestors. It runs on diesel-electric power, clean, efficient, requiring a fraction of the crew that steam demanded. The trains are longer than anything the Victorian engineers could have imagined. A single locomotive and its crew can move more freight in a day than hundreds of wagon teams once moved in a month. By 2011, the route mileage has shrunk from that 1916 peak of 254,000 miles to about 140,000. But what remains carries more freight, more efficiently, than the entire vast network of a century earlier. The railroad's share of American freight reaches 43%, higher than in any other wealthy nation on earth. All that geography, the vast distances, the mountain ranges, the great plains that once made the railroad so desperately necessary has made it impossible to replace. The country is still threaded with iron, still breathing through its veins of steel. And so we come, at last, to the present, or rather, to tonight. Somewhere out there, beyond your window, beyond the quiet streets and the sleeping houses, the freight trains are still moving. They move through the night the way they always have, in long strings of boxcars and tankers and flat cars loaded with containers, their lights cutting through the dark, their wheels speaking their old language to the rails. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. In some small town in Nebraska, a crossing gate comes down and red lights blink in the darkness. A driver waits, engine idling, while the train passes, car after car after car, each one carrying something from somewhere to somewhere else, part of an unbroken chain of commerce that stretches back almost 200 years to that summer morning in Baltimore, when an old man pressed a silver spade into the Maryland earth, and the crowd cheered and the band played, and everyone felt for a moment that they were standing at the beginning of something enormous. They were right. They were standing at the beginning of America. Now the crossing gate rises. The driver moves on. The train's rear lights dwindle to a point of red in the distance, and then they are gone, and the night is quiet again. Let that image hold you for a moment. The dark prairie, the stars overhead, the same stars that shone on the work camps and the survey parties and the Pullman passengers and the immigrants pressing their faces to the window glass to see their new country passing. The same stars, still. Let your body grow heavier now. Let the rhythm of the rails carry you, that slow, deep, ancient percussion that has lulled so many travelers into sleep. The sound of a country moving through the dark. Ba-dum, ba-dum. You have traveled a long way tonight, across mountains and plains, through boom and depression, through war and peace and the slow passage of a century and more. You have seen the golden spike driven and the great trains running and the quiet freight moving through the winter dark. Now it is time to be still. The train moves on without you. America sleeps. And so, gently and slowly, do you.